Star Wars at its very best is a cinematic marvel. The set pieces, the spectacle, the political drama, and of course, trade negotiations. While Star Wars Zero Company is by its nature a more pared-back affair, it successfully captures the essence and cinematic nature of Star Wars. At first glance, Zero Company appears to be the turn-based tactical strategy game XCOM with a Star Wars wrapper. If you said this, you wouldn't just be right, you'd also be very wrong, as Zero Company is so much more. The game's story sees you thrust into the middle of the Clone Wars as Hawks, the leader of Zero Company, a mercenary outfit made up of a ragtag team of cons, crooks, an ex-clone trooper, and later a noble, a Jedi, and a Mandalorian. Your team is offered a contract to work as a covert off-the-books unit for Republic intelligence, tasked with hunting down a mystical separatist organisation known as the Infinite Coil. As you can likely already tell, Zero Company's main story doesn't handhold those unfamiliar with the Star Wars universe. It will resonate most with heavyweight fans, but may be a tad confusing for newcomers. The game's main questline is full of twists and turns, and is tonally best compared to some of the more mature elements of the Clone Wars TV series, though it is perhaps one of the game's least exciting elements, as the real meat of the story resides in the complex shades of grey painted into each of its characters. Through their relationships, Zero Company weaves the political intrigue of the TV series Andor, exploring the way inherent belief systems of cultures and factions bleed into the individual's ideals and the tensions these create. The characters that make up Zero Company have varied principles and ideals. Some are supportive of the Separatists but are happy to do the Republic's work for a paycheck, while others such as Trick, a former clone trooper, are obviously more loyal to the Republic. While you'll often be presented with 2 to 3 options throughout the game's many dilemmas, neither point you toward a strict good or evil as most games do. Instead, the way you interact with your companions and cater to their individual belief systems shapes your story. None of these change the main quest or its ending, but the connections you make and the journey itself is what makes Zero Company special. Much of what makes this storytelling so compelling is the game's presentation. The facial animations and expressions of characters in cutscenes and conversations conveys a depth of emotion that supports the largely outstanding writing and voice acting.
I told you it was extortion and you were all, oh, desperate times, Rue. And guess what? Surprise, surprise, now they are even more desperate.
Aurelio's gone.
Did he run off?
No.
Though these animations can at times be hit and miss, it's clear the level of effort put into Hawks wasn't evenly matched for all characters. The noble Jay is especially let down, while lip-syncing across the board is an obvious eyesore in an otherwise fabulous visual package. Likewise, the game's worlds adhere to the visual language of the Star Wars universe, and while they aren't overly complex or huge in scale, they generally add to the atmosphere of the many tense firefights. This adherence is furthered by the deep range of visual customization options for your characters, which allow you to deck them out in a surprisingly satisfying manner. The game's storytelling isn't just visual though, and is further enhanced through the various quests and gameplay mechanics Zero Company brings to the table. Quests are split into 2 categories: non-combat operations and combat missions. Operations are essentially dialogue box stories that often come with split decisions, each bearing their own pros and cons. These decisions range from what kind of rewards you receive, what level of risk they have attached to them, and what characters you send to complete them. Sending characters can see them suffer injury, increase their respective bonds, or depending on their suitability to the situation, will dictate whether the operation is a success or failure. New operations are offered with a strict time limit every cycle, which advances following each combat mission. You'll be forced to choose your operations carefully, as it's impossible to complete them all in a single playthrough. Combat missions, for those familiar with XCOM, play out almost identically to their tactical counterpart. The game operates on a grid-based system with half and full cover mechanics, destructible environments, chance to hit calculations, Overwatch, and a deep and vast character class system where each character possesses their own unique abilities and skill set. Thankfully, this is all a positive, as developer Reactor, whose team is made up of a large contingent of former XCOM developers, has excelled at replicating its thrilling mission and level design here. While almost all the characters in Zero Company have their own comparable counterpart class in XCOM, the inclusion of a Jedi and droids provides unique twists to the formula. Thankfully, the Jedi doesn't feel particularly overpowered on most missions, and is generally only able to travel moderate distances and use a single lightsaber strike per turn. This means force moves such as push and pull, and a more defensive playstyle must generally be relied upon when dealing with multiple enemies. While the droid class operates purely as a support unit, granting teammates extra actions per turn, scanning the battlefield making enemies easier to hit, and firing grenades from afar wreaking havoc on enemy cover. Though the game's missions are generally excellent, some are arduous and drawn-out experiences due to a rogue camera and repetitive enemy animations. Without delving into the story, many of the Coil soldiers are able to upgrade their stats after taking damage, or can share their HP with a fellow soldier. This is generally paired with an accompanying camera pan and animation, which can take 4 to 5 seconds to complete following every attack. Often these enemies would take around 6 to 8 hits per turn, meaning you've waited more than half a minute watching the enemy beat its chest or cry out in pain. While this doesn't sound like much, it adds significant length to what is a naturally slow-paced and methodical genre. Missions that went for more than half an hour were a regularity, and often they felt they should have been over in 2/3 of the time. The camera is also a disaster. It will regularly dart around the screen, unsure of where it's meant to be next as it ping-pongs between friend and foe. It was the cause of more than a few headaches. This was further burdened by some really poor performance at times. Running on a high-end PC, the game struggled to hold a regular 60 frames per second and would regularly stutter and be slow to load in textures as scenes changed. Thankfully, an update released the day before the review embargo increased performance significantly, but performance issues in the latter stages of the game sadly endured. Unfortunately, these performance hits were generally felt in one of the game's most interesting innovations. Rather than the major story missions being simple extractions in and out of the battlefield, many of your fights are bookended or broken up by sections where you'll be able to freely explore the environment in a third-person perspective. While disappointingly, these sections aren't at all deep in terms of interactivity or vast in scope, they do provide an interesting palate cleanser and sense of movement forward through the story. These moments added further to the world building and gave the characters more breathing room to converse and broaden the story.
The hell's a slug rat?
In another unique innovation, the game also integrates a bond system where characters receive rewards based on their narrative relationships between one another, often in the form of small permanent stat boosts. Bonds are influenced by the frequency of which you take characters to battle together, your decisions in operations, and conversations in between quests in the game's main hub. Actions you take can disappoint some characters and appease others, while simple actions such as tossing a stim or assisting an attack can help it grow. Where the game's intense focus on characters and their relationships really shines is in its connection to the players and to the narrative. Just as in XCOM, characters can die. If a player is downed during a mission, they suffer an injury. These can be healed between missions in the medbay, but if a character suffers 3 injuries, it results in their death. Where in XCOM your soldiers were essentially dispensable, yes, you'd lose their skill set and their developed abilities, they'd be replaced with another grunt ready to dive headfirst into a firefight with no discernible traits beside their stats. However, in Zero Company, the death of some characters results in your playthrough either ending or deviating heavily. Entire missions, quest lines, and rewards will disappear completely, and your journey to the end of Zero Company's main story will be much swifter. Unfortunately, Zero Company isn't a particularly difficult affair, and during my playthrough on normal difficulty, none of my operatives suffered more than 1 injury. For anyone who has played an XCOM game, even if it was a decade ago, I'd recommend cranking up the difficulty to its maximum.
Another hit.
Despite its minor flaws, Star Wars Zero Company lives up to the cinematic legacy of Star Wars while bringing unique and refreshing ideas to the XCOM formula and turn-based tactical strategy genre. Its gameplay doesn't reinvent the wheel, but its approach to storytelling adds a weight to your decisions both in and out of combat thanks to the deep connections cultivated between the player and characters. It is a 35 to 40 hour adventure I'd gladly take a ride through again to explore each character to their fullest and the different tactical combinations and playstyles on offer. Zero Company is a must for Star Wars fans and an enjoyable experience for those seeking another strategy fix. If you enjoyed this review, please be sure to like and subscribe to The Byte for more gaming news and reviews.